everyone, welcome to another episode of Rights for Women. It's Wednesday, July 24, as I'm recording this introduction. And just yesterday, actually, I had a lovely chat with today's guest, and that guest is multi-published Australian author Sandie Docker. Sandie has a fabulous new release called the LYREBIRD Lake Ladies Choir, which I've recently had the pleasure of reading. And it was fantastic to talk to Sandie about that book, about the writing of it, which is her sixth book, but also about the kind of experiences she's had in terms of branding as an author and rebranding, and of course her writing process over the years, how that has evolved, and a whole lot of other authorly type talk. So I know you're going to love that chat with Sandie as it's coming up. Just a quick personal update from me this week. Not much to report other than what I told you last week. I'm working my way through the draft of A Place of Her Own, the third book in the Blackwater Lake series. And I also want to give a huge shout out again to my Patreon supporters. Thank you to those people who are signing up. The latest Patreon missive that I have sent out, which was a little video I did yesterday about how I am organising my plot for A Place of Her Own, how I am tapping into all those things which, particularly as commercial fiction author, so important to know, things like your character's wound, the lie, the truth that they will find at the end of the story when their character arc is complete. Things like the major dramatic question, just how I'm mapping all those things out, making sure that I've got those things clear in my head as I move through this draft, because I do have to have this draft written fairly quickly. And of course, they're things that you might not necessarily know up front for your first draft. They're things that you might work out during the course of that first draft and that you then might concentrate on for revision. But in the latest Patreon video that went out to Patreon family supporters, a little insight into how I'm organising that as I work my way through the draft of the third book in this series. So thank you to everybody who is following along on Patreon. I'd also like to give a big shout out to everybody who is supporting the podcast by following, liking and sharing our posts on Instagram in particular and Facebook. My fabulous virtual assistant, Annie Bucknell, is doing a brilliant job of keeping everybody updated and also putting out some really fun memes and things about the writing process, the writing life, reading, bookstores and all sorts of things. So if you're not following Rights for Women on Instagram, just head to Insta and follow us on W4W podcast. So that's about it for everything I have to tell you this week. But I do want to tell you a little bit about Sandie. So Sandie Docker is an Australian author who grew up in Coffs Harbour, and she first fell in love with reading when her father introduced her to fantasy books as a teenager. Her love of women's fiction began when she first read Jane Austen for the HSC, but it wasn't until she was taking a translation course at the university that her Mandarin lecturer suggested she might have a knack for writing. A seed of an idea sat quietly in the back of her mind for quite some time while she lived overseas and travelled the world, and then eventually became her first book. Now living in Sydney, Sandie writes about love, loss, family and small country towns, a little bit like someone else I know. Her debut novel, The Kookaburra Creek Cafe, was released in 2018, The Cottage at Rosella Cove in 2019, The Banksia Bay Beach Shack in 2020, the Wattle Island Book Club in 2021 and the Red Gum River Retreat in 2023. Her latest novel, The LYREBIRD Lake Country Choir, has recently been released, and Sandie is right in the midst of a huge tour around various states in Australia and appearing at libraries and bookstores. So it was fantastic to talk to Sandie. As I said, there is so much that we had to chat about. We've both been writing for quite some time and comparing notes on our writerly journeys, and also this whole notion of women's fiction as a label and whether that or not that should be used. And we actually had a big chat about that in this conversation, and you'll have to listen on to see if we agree on that. So settle back, grab a cuppa, put on your walking shoes, whatever it is that you do when you're listening or to Rights for Women. And remember that you can also watch the episode on the Rights for Women tube, which you can subscribe to and follow so that you get an update every time a new episode is uploaded. Enjoy this chat with Sandie, and I'll be back in your ears next week. Sandie Docker, Welcome to the Rights for Women Convo Couch.
Thank you so much for having me, Pamela. It's lovely to be here.
Great to have you on. And I just was looking up actually on the podcast website. The last time you were on, you spoke to Cassie Hamer, who was our guest host at the time, about the Red Gum River Retreat, which was your last book. Yeah.
It was, yes, last year.
Feels like longer ago than that, but
maybe because it was Cassie and it wasn't you and I.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We've obviously caught up at events and things, and we'll talk perhaps a little later about the Northern Beaches Readers Festival, which is coming up in September, where I'll be seeing you again. But today we are here mainly to talk about your latest release, which is the LYREBIRD Lake Ladies Choir. I always have to stop, Sandie, with your titles and make sure I've got them right, because they've got a few words in them and there's often a bit of alliteration going on.
Yes, you can blame my publisher for that. And like the alliteration, and I have tripped myself up a number of times talking about lyrebird, which is why I tend to just call my books by one word, lyrebird.
Lyrebird, easy. Yeah, let's talk about lyrebird. I finished this recently, and I don't know what it is about your book, Sandie, but I found this the same with Red Gum River. You have this way of writing, and I'm going to ask you about this to see if you know what it is. I'll ask you for this.
I hope I've got an intelligent answer.
No, it's a good comment. But sometimes these things are quite mysterious in the way that we write and whether we can actually articulate them. So we'll talk about this a little bit later. But you have this way of writing that just really tugs at the reader's heartstrings, not in a melodramatic way, but in a way that really makes you want to find out what's going to happen to the characters. You've got this kind of real grasp on getting into the emotions of the characters, I think. And I definitely felt that in this book. I would put it down overnight when I was reading it and then couldn't wait to get back to it the next day. Would make myself wait till the night because obviously other things to do in daylight hours. But it was always just so lovely to reconnect with the characters each time I went back into the story. Before we get into talking about the book, just so readers know what we're talking about, can you give us a little rundown on what Lyrebird is about?
Sure. It's the story of Hannah, who is a single mum living in her car with her 8-year-old son, Leo, after they find themselves homeless. And one night, as she's trying to settle him in the back seat of the car, she sings him a lullaby, which is called the LYREBIRD Lake Lullaby. And it's a song that her father used to sing to her. And she has no idea if LYREBIRD Lake is a real place or not. But given the situation she's in, she decides quite on a whim that she's going to head there and see if she can turn her fortune around, so to speak. When she arrives in LYREBIRD Lake, she meets sisters Eleanor and Maggie, who came out from Ireland in 1973 under circumstances we might have to dance around for spoiler reasons.
I know, it's going to be tricky to avoid spoilers in this, I think.
It is. And they are running the LYREBIRD Lake Ladies Choir, and they're also running a lodge for women who are finding themselves in vulnerable position. So they take Hannah under their wing and encourage her to join the choir and put a roof over her head in the lodge. And one night when Hannah is singing this same lullaby to Leo to get him to sleep again, Eleanor's walking the corridors of the lodge. She's the elder of the two sisters, and she stops dead in her tracks when she hears Hannah singing this lullaby, because it's a lullaby that she wrote 40 years earlier and one that she never showed anyone.
We're going to leave all the listeners there on that cliffhanger.
Absolutely.
Have to read the book or listen to the book to find out what happened. Where did the inspiration for this story come from for you, Sandie?
Yeah, there were probably two major points of inspiration. I don't know about you, Pamela, but I find that for any one book, there's usually a couple of different sparks of inspiration. There might be one that kicks it off, and then there's a couple of others that help build out and flesh out the entire story. It's very rarely just one inspiration. So the first spark of inspiration for this one was when I was reading an article about homelessness in Australia. And the statistic that kind of kick-started it all for me was the fact that the fastest growing demographic of homeless people in Australia are women in their 50s and older. And I was blown away by that. I hit 50 this year. And I'm thinking, how is this possible that women like me are ending up in situations like this? And the statistics are horrendous. Of the 122,000 people that find themselves homeless every night in Australia, 3 out of 4 of those are women and children. And so I went down the research rabbit hole, as we refer to it. And I think there are certain aspects that as a society, we understand how someone might find themselves in this position. If a woman is a victim of domestic violence, I think we can understand how she might end up being homeless. If addiction is running in the family somewhere, I think we can understand how someone might end up in that vulnerable position. But other than that, we tend to see it as a problem for others. That it happens to other people and for other reasons, and it wouldn't happen to you or I. But the frightening thing about it is happening to those people that we don't naturally think of as being vulnerable. Women like myself who have chosen to stay home and raise children and give up work for that, who haven't worked for quite some time, in a stable relationship, stable financially for all intents and purposes, and then something just goes wrong and they find themselves vulnerable. And so I wanted to shed a little bit of light on that side of it, that side of homelessness that we don't naturally think of. So that was where Hannah's story came from. And then the other spark of inspiration is to do with Eleanor and Maggie and their reasons for coming to Australia from Ireland in 1973. And that is to do with my own grandmother, who is a lot older than these ladies. My grandma came out here in the 1920s, I think it was. But there's a bit of mystery surrounding the how and the why of my grandmother coming to Australia. Things like her marriage certificate having been doctored and hints of other people within the family that nobody knew anything of. And he's tried over the years to find out the truth to her story, and I've never been able to find it. Being of a somewhat imaginative mindset, I have made up 1,000 different scenarios over the years of what may or may not have happened to my nan. And one of those scenarios that I made up for her is what became Eleanor and Maggie's story. And again, I'm sorry for dancing around things.
No, that's fine. You're dancing very beautifully, Sandie, because it does require a bit of tap dancing to not give away the spoilers, which I'm also very conscious of. So we will edit any out if we do give them. So you had those two kind of inspirations for your characters. And a huge part of the story, which is indicated by the title, is the music, which, Eleanor and Maggie have a choir, and Hannah is involved in music herself separately, being very careful with what I say. I guess it's about the healing power of music and the way that music can bring people together. Where does that kind of thing come from for you? Have you had personal experience of that?
Not as overtly as what is explored within the pages of LYREBIRD, but I think all of us can relate to music being a healing power. You only have to think of just your everyday life. If you've had a really bad day at work, or you've broken up with your boyfriend, or you've had troubles with your family over Christmas, or whatever it might be, one of the first things we do is we pop on our favorite song to try to lift ourselves out of that doldrums that we might be in. And I definitely believe that music has healing powers and that it is a primal part of who we are as human beings. We were singing before we could talk. If you think true back to caveman days. Yeah. And so it is a very primal thing. And the fact that we could sing before we could talk is an indication of it bringing people together and that sense of belonging. So that's always been in the back of my mind. I'm not musical myself, but I can respond to music. And I think everybody can. It's a universal language. And I explored music therapy in Red Gum last year's novel. And there is a very small element of a choir in that story. And when I was writing that, I remember thinking, man, a choir would be something really fun to explore properly. And so that bled into this one. So using that primal sense of music being a healing power and the sense of community and belonging that comes with a choir.
Which, of course, is perfect for your kind of story, that whole idea of community and belonging, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. I'll have to say, Sandy, it is on my bucket list to one day join a choir. My family laugh when I say this because even though two of my daughters have quite beautiful voices and sing, they're not so much now, but they have sung in the past. And I always claim that they get their voice from me. They would dispute that. But yeah, it's on my bucket list. I just love that idea, like you were saying, of a bunch of particularly women for some reason coming together and just letting go. And I know that it's more than just letting go. There's harmonies and all that sort of thing, but just that sense of being part of something bigger and those voices just harmonizing.
Yeah, and the beauty of a choir like the Lyrebird Lake Ladies Choir is that you don't have to be able to sing to join it. It's a community choir, and I say Eleanor and Maggie will take anyone. I think I may be the exception.
Maybe
To
you
the
and
way
me.
to Friday opera. My daughter has a beautiful voice. She sang for her HSC as her major work. She sings beautifully. I don't know where she gets it from. It is definitely not from me. When she was 3 years old, and you sing lullabies to your kids and you play games on the carpet with them and sing nursery rhymes, she would turn around and say, "Mummy, please stop." That's how bad I am. So I think if I rocked up at Lyrebird Lake, Eleanor and Maggie might perhaps suggest I make the tea for the choir. But other than that, they will take anyone. And it comes down to that sense of belonging. And I think that, again, as human beings, belonging is as important to us as breathing. If we don't find that place in the world where we belong, whether that's as part of a community or within a family or within a relationship or friendship group or whatever it might be, we don't find that place where we belong, then that heads us down a very dangerous and dark path. And we are all searching for that sense of belonging. And I think that a choir can do that, and particularly a choir like this, where they will accept anyone with open arms and just, raising those voices as one. And the fact that when you're in a choir, it doesn't actually matter that much if you can't sing particularly well, because it's the fact that you're surrounded by all of these other voices, and it's the blending of those voices that makes everybody sound good, regardless of the individual's ability.
I agree. There's nothing more uplifting than listening to a choir and just being spirited away somewhere.
Who doesn't
wherever it is they
smile?
take it.
Who
Yeah.
doesn't smile when a choir is performing?
Yeah. Sandy, I just wanted to talk a little bit about your writing process. When comes time to write a new book, what comes first for you? Is it an idea, like this idea of a choir? Is it a character? Is it a plot line? What starts the story off for you?
Yeah, it's definitely the idea. I am very firmly in the pantsing camp of plotters versus pantsers, which I'm sure your listeners are very familiar
Yeah,
with
we
the
talk about that often.
terminology. Yeah, so I'm very much in the pantsing camp, and I very much go based on feel. So I start with the idea. So for Lyrebird, for example, it was Hannah living in her car with her son. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And I just start writing from that place, and then the characters tell me where they want to go.
Fabulous. So you've got an idea of story, as we all do, and how a story needs to flow and what the turning points are and things. So I guess you know what you're working towards. But in terms of those practicalities of, okay, I've written one scene or a few scenes, now I've got to sit down and write the next one. How do you tackle that?
Yeah, and I think this comes with a little bit of experience, because I definitely did not do this with my first couple of books, but I also wasn't on any kind of deadline with my first couple of books. So they were pre-contract, which meant I had all the time in the world to faff around with those. And I took all the time in the world with those. Kookaburra took 3 years to write. Rosella Cove took 5. So it didn't matter whether I come back the next day, had no idea what to do. I could walk away and come back to it the next day, the next week, the next month. It didn't matter. But once you are on contract and once you've got that little bit of experience behind you, what I have found really helpful, and it's something that I have definitely done for the last probably 2 to 3 books now, is once I have decided that I'm done for the day, whenever that might be, as you said, whether it's one scene or a couple of scenes or maybe a chapter, who knows, I have a little piece of paper and pen beside my keyboard, and I jot down where I think the story is going next, or just some little dot points, essentially just dot points of what I think is going to happen next. so that when I come to it the next morning, that's where I start with those dot points. Doesn't mean that they make it into that next piece of writing, but it means that I'm not coming to the computer blank and going, oh, you know what?
Yeah.
I don't know what to do next. So I always make sure I leave a little note to myself, and maybe it's not even about plot. It might be about character, or it might be about feeling, or it might be about explore XYZ more, something like that. But I always do leave myself a little note.
And do you revise as you go, or you get to the end and then see what you've got?
I try not to revise as I go unless I hit a point where I know that it's an absolute disaster and it has to be thrown out. I'm a very firm believer in get the story down and fix it later.
Yeah. And then what would your process be then? You read through the whole thing, go back and fix certain things. What's your kind of first revision process?
Yeah, I do tend to also write notes about things that I know I need to fix, because I find if I stop to fix it as I go, as I said, unless it's a really major issue that I know I can't move forward from, I just leave myself a note to fix things, because I don't want to get bogged down in fixing it in that process, because that's one, and I'm a huge procrastinator. I'm really good at it. You know, the Olympics are you raising your hand. The Olympics are coming up. And I tell you what, if there was a gold medal for procrastination, I'd be in with the best chance of winning that. So I know if I do stop and fix those things along the way, I'll never get to the end. So just like I have the notes for what I want to do the next day, I also keep a notebook of things that I know I need to fix. And so it might be fixing a description or fixing a plot point that's not quite working. And I keep those notes in a book and keep those beside me. So when I've got what's the bare bones of the first draft down, I look through that first. And if there's simple things that I need to fix, describe the lake better, I'll go in and do those so that I feel like I'm moving forward. If it's slightly trickier things like fixing a character arc or fixing a plot arc, then I do go from beginning to end, read it through and find those moments where I can fix those issues that I know are already there.
And what would you say? I know it's always hard to quantify this, but what would you say would be your rough number of revisions before you're ready to send it out to a reader?
Depends how close I am to my deadline. So being a pantser, and I pants everything in my life, deadlines and I are not very good friends. So it depends how long I've got to do it. It would be maybe 2 or 3 drafts before it goes to the publisher. Sometimes they're in better shape than others when they get there. And if they're in worse shape, then that's obviously a stronger structural edit that we need to do. Yeah, so 2 to 3 drafts before it's ready to be seen.
Yeah, yeah. And do you use beta readers, Sandie, or is your publisher your first reader generally?
I usually have one person that will read it before it goes to the publisher, but no more than one, because too many voices just confuses things. And 9 times out of 10, if you had 3 or 4 different beta readers, they would have different opinions. And then you've got to figure out which one's which. Back in, as I said, in the early days, but before I was under contract, I had many readers that were reading my work before other people saw it. But now it's just the one person usually, and depends on how close I am to that dreaded deadline as to whether it's, can you please just give this a proofread and highlight anything that's massive that stands out, or whether it's a proper feedback session.
Well, I think it's interesting, isn't it, the way you refine your process as you go along, like you are at book 6, so you know what works for you now and how that can help not hinder the rest of the process.
Yeah, and as you would know, Pamela, you write each book differently too. The way you wrote your first one is not the same as the way you wrote your 6th one or your 10th one or whatever number people might be up to. You have evolved as a writer. You've evolved with your craft. And as you just mentioned, you've learned what's worked for you and what doesn't work for you. I've tried plotting, for example. That does not work for me. I now don't even consider doing it because I know that's not going to work and it's actually going to make things worse for me. So it's getting to know yourself and trusting in yourself and your own processes.
Yeah, that whole thing of trusting your process is really important, having confidence in it, isn't it?
Yeah.
How is writing this book different for you then? You mentioned each book is different. I 100% agree with that. All mine have been different. How was this one different for you than the others?
This one was different in that through my own fault, I really cut the deadline fine on this one. So I didn't have a lot of time to actually get it in a space where it could go to the publisher. That was, as I said, through my own fault. Nobody else is to blame for that one. I could blame life because it is life, but
It happened. Yeah.
I just have to own it. So that was really tight. The other thing that was different with this one is that I underwrote it, and I normally overwrite. So if you're looking at, say, the average word count of being 90,000-ish words, I would normally write like 110 and have to pare it back, for example. Possibly because I was cutting it so close to the deadline with this one, I underwrote this one, and I only had 70,000 words when I finished, and I'm using inverted commas here.
Yes. For
When I
anybody who can't
finished.
see.
No, I know. Finished the first draft. So that was a bit of a shock to me, having to do that. And then I had to figure out what's missing, because there's a reason that most books are around that 90 to 100,000 word count. And if you've gone way over, that means you've done too much of something. And if you've gone under, it means there's something missing. And so I had to figure out what was missing from this one. So yeah, underwriting this one was quite a new thing for me.
So then it was a matter in the next stage of adding those words and scenes in, fleshing it out a bit.
Yeah, it wasn't just fleshing it out, because you can always do that, right? You can beef up your descriptions and that sort of thing. But it was more than that. There was absolutely something missing, and I had to figure out what that was. And that was through a conversation with my editor. I handed it in at 70, but with the caveat in the email, I know there's something missing. I know we've still got more work to do. I'm still trying to figure it out. And I think it was a phone call brainstorming session that we had about what was actually missing from this. And for anyone who has read it, what wasn't in that original draft of 70,000 words were the choir vignettes. So I'm
Oh,
calling them
okay.
vignettes because they're not full chapters. They're about 2 pages
Yeah.
long. And the first one is, it starts the book with the very first rehearsal of the Lyrebird Lake Ladies Choir. And we see that from Maggie's point of view, and it's just 2 pages long. And we see that throughout the novel. That was not in that original draft, and that was what was missing. So that was
Okay,
a late
great.
addition.
Yeah, now that, because I've read it, of course, and that does definitely add to the whole kind of community feel of it and that whole sense of the choir being such a crucial element of the story.
Yeah, and giving Maggie a voice, because
Yeah.
while Maggie is one of the main characters, it is predominantly told through Hannah and Eleanor's voice. But Maggie is a very important part of the story, and we need to see her voice, because when all the secrets come out, we need to see her reaction to that. So giving her that voice, and yes, seeing the choir build over time and getting to know those ladies a little bit more as well was really important.
Yeah, there's some lovely characters in the choir and they appear in those sections.
Yeah.
That kind of brings me to, you mentioned Maggie and her voice coming through there. Eleanor's voice also is a big part of the story. And there is a dual timeline happening in this story as well. How did you tackle the writing of that dual timeline? Because then we see the sisters when they were in Ireland, basically. I don't think that's giving too
Mhm.
much away.
Right.
Their life before they arrived in Australia. So, how did you tackle writing that and weaving that through the story? Did you do it was it organic? You just got to a point in the story, you thought, oh, now I need to tell this part of the story, and then that happened? Or did you insert it later? What was that process for you?
Yeah, and again, this has been different for all 6 of the novels, because I write in multiple timelines in all of my novels. Some of them I have done in alternating chapters, written them that way: past thread, present thread,
Yep.
past thread, present thread. Others, I've written the entire historical section first, then written the present, and then smooshed them together during the editing process. With this one, I did separate it. I wrote the historical thread first, and then inserted that into their present. So we see Maggie and Eleanor in 1973 and also present day, and that's through Eleanor's point of view. And then as I separated the historical section into different chapters of where the natural breaks were for that, and added Eleanor's present perspective onto that, when I was adding Eleanor's present perspective, that's when I was writing Hannah's present perspective as well.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting. The same voices, but they're different because Eleanor, whose voice we're hearing in those past and present timelines, so much has happened to her. And it's just a really interesting way of setting up that storyline, but leaving those gaps and ending each of those scenes on a particular note to keep the reader guessing and wondering. And then gradually, as the story unfolds, we get to start to piece things together. So it works really beautifully.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, Eleanor at 19, which is how old she is in the 1973 thread, is a very different person. Eleanor in 2029 when she's 68 or whatever it might be. Math is not my strong point. And we don't know what's happened in the meantime. We see bits of what's happened, but we don't know the entirety of what's happened. And so to have her still be Eleanor, but to have a 19-year-old voice and a 68-plus-year-old voice who's lived, but still make it the same person, that's the trick when you're writing in multiple timelines.
Yeah. So it's like you're tapping into or trying to imagine who is this older person in a younger life and what were
the
their
younger and
dreams
older
hopes
version.
and things like that. This is the side of writing and character stuff that I love is just all this psychology and just thinking about backstory. And because it's like a backstory, but you bring it to life through these past narrative scenes, which is fantastic.
And we also want to leave room for the reader to see Eleanor in the present day with the edge that she has compared to the 19-year-old woman who was quite rebellious and quite a dreamer. How did she get from there to there? You want to leave room for the reader to imagine why has she got this edge to her at the age of 68 when this is what she was like at 19, but it still has to make sense for the reader. That's the balancing point.
And this is the beauty of writing, I think, a couple of things, multiple points of view, multiple timelines or dual timelines, is it does give you this ability as the writer to play around with, I guess you're playing around with the reader a little bit, not in a horrible manipulative way. We're keeping them guessing and it does give you that opportunity to create, I think, tension and mystery and all those secrets that we know are in there, but you can work around them more when you've got all these different things going on, as opposed to maybe a single point of view, single timeline story, which I'm currently writing. And now I'm talking to you, Sandy, and thinking, why?
I'm a firm believer, Pamela, that the story tells us how it wants to be written.
True.
Whether that is single timeline, multiple timeline, single point of view, first tense, past, the present tense, past tense, first person, third person. The story tells us how it wants to be written if we're open enough to listen to it. So you are clearly writing that story that way for a reason.
Yes. And it is the third in a series and the others have been single point of view, single timeline. So there you go. I have written multiple points of view and multiple timelines. So maybe the next one. Sandy, we were talking about your publishing career to date, and this is your 6th book. It is a bit of a different look, this book. We have a beautiful cover. You've got, actually, anybody who is watching on video, you'll see Sandy's got her gorgeous book covers. And I mean, all of your book covers have been absolutely stunning and just so eye-catching. But this one is a little bit of a different look. Can you give us any insight into why that is?
Yeah, it still fits the branding. And gosh, I hate using that word when we're talking about something creative. But at the end of the day, it is a business and it is branding. So it still looks like a Sandie Docker book, but I think of it as slightly more sophisticated than the other 5. But as I'm sure that most of your listeners will know, that we don't get a lot of say in our covers. When you're traditionally published, you don't have much of a say in your covers. So I did not know that they were changing direction with book number 6. I just got that email, the same email that we all get from the publishing house. Here's your cover. We hope you love it as much as we do. Yeah, and that's regardless of which publishing house you are at.
Exactly.
I hear that story from every writer that I know. And I was quite shocked when I first opened it because it wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting very similar to the other 5, obviously trying to guess what colour it might be.
Yeah.
I knew there would be a lyrebird on the cover, obviously, because of the title. But other than that, I didn't know. So I was a little bit shocked when I first opened it, and it took me a little while to get used to the fact that we were going in a slightly different direction. I love it. It is now my favorite of all of my covers. I absolutely love it. And what I think it does, and I'm assuming this was the purpose behind it, is that it captures the depth of the novel. That there are some dark themes in every single one of my novels, and the other covers maybe don't capture that, whereas this captures that sophistication and perhaps that more historical thread within it. And I think it was just a matter of 6 books in, it's time just to switch things up again, because the market changes. In 6 years, the
Yeah.
market is going to change. The readership is going to change. I have grown and changed as an author, and the cover needs to reflect that.
Oh, 100% agree, Sandy. And of course, fashions go in and out with cover design just as they do with everything else. But yeah, I fully agree with you that, I have always loved your covers. And as I said, they're very eye catching. They probably don't speak so much to some of the more serious issues in your books,
Yep.
whereas I think this does give you the scope to really, and going forward with your future books, I think this gives you a lot of room to play with the look of obviously keeping it similar to this one, probably for some time. But yeah, I just think it broadens it out a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And we have this discussion quite a lot, and I'm sure you do this the same when you're having events with readers, because readers are always fascinated with covers and how much say we do have in them. Obviously, when you are independently published, you have a lot more say in your cover, but readers are always fascinated by that. And the thing that I always respond with is that it's not a writing decision. A cover is not a writing decision, it's a marketing decision, which is why when you're with a traditional house, it's out of your hands because they're the experts in that. And when you're independently published, it would be the same thing. You can't think about your words and how precious they are to you and that it's your heart and soul. You need to think of that cover as, how am I going to sell this book? Who's going to pick it up from the shelf or online when I'm searching the online stores? Who is it going to appeal to? Because obviously a cover that has maybe dark colors and a knife with a blood dripping off it, that tells you what's inside that story. You instantly know. And despite the adage, you can't judge a book by its cover, you absolutely have to when you're choosing. If it's an author unknown to you, that is the very first selling point, is that cover. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
marketing decision first and
yeah,
foremost.
definitely. I know it's early days, Sandy. The book, how long has the book been out now?
It's
Oh, okay.
18th of June. Yeah,
Yeah,
18th of
okay.
June. Coming out.
So it is early days, but have you had any readers come up to you at events, or have you had any feedback online or messages to that effect, that of readers who perhaps haven't read any of your earlier books but have picked it up because of the cover or were attracted by the cover?
I haven't had that, but I will say that at the events that I've recently done, the majority of people in the audience were readers that were new to me.
Okay.
It is fabulous. And one of the selling points that the libraries do, obviously, is put up a picture of the cover. So I don't know if there's a direct correlation between that. I hope that there is. And what's interesting is that those people then also look at your backlist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. This whole issue of author branding, which of course the cover and the title and all that sort of thing is such a big part of it. How important do you think it is for authors to be pretty au fait with their own author brand and to have a pretty secure idea of who they are in terms of branding?
I think it's essential to this because, as we just mentioned, it is at the end of the day a business. And we have to treat it that way in this modern age. Gone are the days where a writer could just sit in their shed and write their beautiful words and put it out there and magic happens. That's gone. We are expected to be on social media. We are expected to connect with our readers. And that's actually part of the job that I really love, is connecting with the readers. But all of that, part of that is brand and who you are and how you, I hate using this word, but how you sell yourself and your stories to the public. And you only have to think about just how many options there are out there for readers. The market is absolutely saturated with wonderful choices from every genre. And if you look in your bookstore or your library, the number of choices that you have is quite mind-blowing. So having a strong brand as an author helps you find new readers, and it helps the readers that already love your work find you very easily in amongst that absolute sea of stock that's out there.
So true, Sandy. And I think part of your brand is, and this is on your website, is that you're an author of contemporary women's fiction,
Mhm.
as I think of myself as that kind of author. This whole label, I guess, of women's fiction is often something that's a little bit contentious. Some people hate it and say, why should it be specifically women, all that sort of thing. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I have actually a pretty strong take on this,
Oh, good. Do tell, because
Pamela.
so do I.
And as a modern, somewhat feminist person raising an 18-year-old daughter, my take may actually surprise people. I think that we should own it. I think we should own the label of women's fiction. Firstly, women make up the bulk of the buying public when it comes to books, right? So why not target ourselves to those people? And the other thing is, I think if we rile against that, all that does is reinforce the fact that women's fiction isn't a valid option.
Mm.
Whereas if we embrace it and we make them want in, that elevates us that, yeah, actually, this is something special. Women's fiction is special and you want in. If I'm the one going, oh, I want out, then I'm actually putting down the thing that I love and the thing that I write. So for me, I think we need to own the label of women's fiction and we want to make the other people want in, not us want out.
Oh, I could not agree more. I'm also a mother of 3 daughters, feminist, and I don't see it as derogatory at all. I, in fact, am loud and proud about
Yes.
contemporary women's fiction as a label. I write books about women for women. That's who my audience
Absolutely.
is. And
Yeah.
I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not embarrassed by it. And
No. And why
I
should
can't,
we be?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the thing. And if we are, then that only reinforces those stereotypes out there that it's not a worthy genre when it absolutely is. I'm one of those people that thinks every genre is worthy. I hate literary snobs. It really does my head in. Every book is important. A comic book is important to the people that it strikes a chord with. Yeah. Make them want in rather than us want out. Absolutely. But we are in the minority, I think, in that.
I think we are. I think we are. I've had this conversation with quite a few people on the podcast, and I think we are. But anyway, we'll stand our ground on that one, Sandy. I'm with you.
Just you and me at the top of the hill with our placards.
Cheering. Woo.
It's the same with motherhood, right? I see this exactly the same as motherhood when we use the term just a mum or what else do you do or what other things you... I am incredibly proud of the fact that I am a mum, incredibly proud of the relationship that I have with my daughter and the job that I have done. And I'm not saying I've done it because none of us are perfect when it comes to parenting. Lord knows I've made a million mistakes there. But of all of the things that I am, and I wrote an article on this probably about 5 years ago in one of the women's online magazines, of all of the things that I am, a wife, a mother, a daughter, a writer. Back then, I was the PNC president. I'm a netball coach. Other jobs that I've done, I've been a teacher. Of all of the things that I am and have been and ever will be, the one thing I would never give up for anything is being a mum. So why on earth should we not be proud of that?
I've got goosebumps. I agree, Sandy. Whoop. Love it. Yeah. Like, just own it. And it's the same. You're talking about genres. It's that thing that a lot of romance authors get too, isn't it? It's just a romance. It's just a romance. And I have said on here, I'm going to admit, I used to have that mindset back in the day when I was a literary snob and I only read literary fiction. And then I realized when I went to write that my natural voice wasn't literary fiction. My natural voice was something much broader. It was commercial fiction, basically, commercial women's fiction. And then when I really started to think and have a good hard look at it, I thought, you idiots, of course. And then when I thought about it, I thought, what are the stories that I love to read? What are the stories I love to watch? They've all got romance and love in them of some kind. I've got a massive poster, like 6-foot poster of Moulin Rouge above my desk. So, who am I to be dissing romance? So my head completely turned around about that. And now whenever I hear anybody, it's just romance. Oh, what are you reading? Oh, just romance. I'm like, my hackles rise. And it's the same with those things you were talking about with just a mum or just a commercial fiction author or whatever. No, These are
No.
important things and we're owning them.
What is more important in life than love? At the end of the day, that's what we're all here for, is love. It really does get my hackles up. And if we think back to the mum thing, if we're not proud as individual mothers ourselves of being a mum and of the job we do, how can we ever expect anyone else to respect that role in society?
Yes. And of course, motherhood is a really important theme, Sandy, in your books, isn't it? Definitely in Lyrebird Lake and in the other books of yours that I've read, there is always a story about parenting or motherhood or relationships between mothers and children.
Yeah, absolutely. Not always biological. Some of the stories have that relationship where it hasn't been a biological connection, but the roles have been that of a parental type figure with, a childlike figure. But definitely Lyrebird and Red Gum have very strong themes of motherhood in them. And I guess part of that is me working through those issues that we've just talked about, owning the fact that I am a mum and I'm very proud of it. And also exploring the challenges that come with motherhood, because anyone who's been a mother or a parent, particularly if you are the primary caregiver within that family unit, there are some challenges that come your way and they're not easy and we don't talk about them enough. So I'm hoping that in Lyrebird Lake, we have the Hannah Leo story where she's homeless with her son in her car. He's 8. And her driving force is to protect him and keep him safe. And she puts all of her emotions and feelings about what's going on at the back because she has to stay strong for her son. So I'm hoping that comes through. And then also Eleanor takes on the role of a mother figure for Maggie when they arrive in Australia at the ages of 19 and 16, having left everything that they knew behind in Ireland. And what does that look like? And then obviously when they take Hannah under their wings in the choir as well, there's different layers of that type of relationship being explored in Lyrebird.
Yeah, yeah. And as you say, isn't it interesting that as you've come to terms with those issues, it's coming through, of course, in your writing. So
Yeah.
I love that. Your writing's evolving just like you are as a person, as we all do. I think it's fabulous. I'm going to get back to some of those emotional things just when we get to the last question, but I just wanted to touch a little bit more on your tour that you're currently doing. Have you actually added up how many different events you're doing, Sandy, for part of this?
Yeah,
It's going to be quite a large number.
it would scare the what out of me if I did. I'm one of those people that will say yes to anything. So every time my publicist has come through and said, "Oh, how about this?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. What about that? Sure. Add it in." Again, partly because, as I mentioned earlier, that I love that connection that you have with readers. So going out and doing events is part of the job that I love. I love seeing readers face to face and chatting about the book and the characters and that sort of thing. But I also am a firm believer in looking back and having no regrets. As we know, writing is a business, so we can't control sales figures and what happens there. But whatever happens with sales figures, I want to be able to look back and go, I did everything that I could, everything that was in my power. So I have done, it is sitting next to me on the desk. I could count them up if I was so inclined, but I don't know that I will. Although I was at the physio this morning and she's, "Oh, you just got back from tour." And I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Oh, so how many towns did you go to?" And it was like 15 towns in 10 days or something.
Oh,
It was
wow.
like ridiculous. And I'm not finished yet. I'm heading off again next week up north.
Yeah, amazing. You got down to Tassie too, I think, as part of the tour, didn't you?
Yeah, so Tassie was first. So I went down to Tassie and spent about 5 days down there, which was freezing but wonderful. And then I've done a South Coast ACT Country Victoria tour. That's the one I've just got back from. And then I'm heading up to Brisbane, Gold Coast, Tweed next. And sprinkled between all of those are local events to me. Sydney's where I am based. So I've got 2 this week in Sydney, and then a bunch of radio interviews and podcast interviews and stuff in between as well. There was one day there where I think on tour, I did 2 or 3 radio interviews and 2 events and driving from town to town at the same time.
Oh my goodness, your head must have been spinning.
I'm a little bit tight.
Just a little.
That's okay.
Just a little.
But things slow down a little bit when I get back from Queensland. But I still have events. I've got some events later in August. I've got a couple of events already booked in for October. In September, we have the festival. So there's no feet touching ground at any point, probably until Christmas.
Wow. That is amazing. Hopefully you get little breaks in between.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about the festival, the Northern Beaches Readers Festival. This will be the second, and I was lucky enough to attend and be part of the first, as I will be at the second, coming up in September. Very excited. Can you tell listeners a little about that, Sandie?
Yeah, so the Northern Beaches Readers Festival, as you said, is in its second year this year. We're a biennial, I always get that wrong, biennial festival, so once every 2 years. And we focus on the sort of stories that we were just talking about, Pamela, the ones that we like to curl up in bed with at nighttime. So the genres of crime, romance, rom-com, women's fiction, historical, magical realism. It's a weekend event in September. I think we have 49 authors this year appearing in panel conversations, a couple of panel sessions, a couple of in-conversation sessions with a couple of workshops as well, which you are a part of, as well as facilitating one of our panels. And it's just a really fun, happy, joyous weekend where we just get to meet all of the writers, as I said, that we love to curl up with at nighttime in bed. And the fact that we call it a readers festival as opposed to a writers festival is very deliberate on the committee's behalf, because we want it to be about the connection that writers have with their readers. That is the focus of the festival. So we're about to release the program to our early bird subscribers to our newsletters. That'll go out on the 24th, and then general ticket sales will be open on the 31st of July.
Exciting. And as you say, Sandie, what I love about this Readers Festival is, and I know this was a lot of feedback that you guys got from people who attended last time, is the fact that it is aimed at people who read commercial fiction. There might be a little bit of literary aspect here and there, but if you look at something like Sydney Writers Festival, and absolutely loved it, had a great time there this year, always loved their sessions, but they're very much marketed around literary fiction. So this is a festival that really focuses on books that you can walk in and pick up from your local bookstore, but also from your kind of discount department stores, Big W, and the books that are out there selling lots and lots of copies, and lots of people are reading and often don't get the chance to meet and talk to the authors or hear the authors.
Yeah, we also are 100% Australian writers.
Fantastic.
Which is different to some of the bigger festivals around where there's a lot of international names at those things. And also at those bigger festivals, there's a lot of politics and environment and social issues, which are fabulous, and that has its place. But we really are about that connection with readers. So we're 100% Australian authors that are coming. And yeah, the vibe was one of the things that was in our exit survey that kept coming through, that they loved the access that people had to the authors. Because what we don't do is lock them away in a green room, usher them to their session, usher them back out again. There was a lot of mingling going on, and there were authors sitting in on each other's sessions last time. There was one night there where, quite by accident, we all ended up at dinner, and there were facilitators and authors and volunteers and readers all having a Thai dinner together. It really is. And maybe this comes back to what comes through my books a lot, that sense of community. We're a community of readers and writers, and that's what's really important to the festival.
That was the perfect segue into what I wanted to ask you, and I alluded to this at the beginning when we first started talking, is the kind of heartfelt nature of your stories and the way that readers connect so strongly to what's happening to the characters and the way you create empathy for the characters. So the question is, what would you say is at the heart of your writing?
Hope. I think hope is at the heart of my writing. I try to keep the scenarios within my stories as realistic as possible. You know, that it could be any one of us that is going through this sort of thing, because I need it to be relatable. For me, I like being able to relate to characters that I'm reading about. While we may not have experienced ourselves Hannah's situation, where she is homeless living in her car. Thankfully, I have not experienced that. And a lot of readers hopefully also have not experienced that. So that situation in itself may not be relatable, but I think it's realistic enough that we could put ourselves in that position. But the thing that we can relate to is Hannah trying to protect her son, Leo, and doing anything she can for her child. Anyone that is a parent knows that emotion. So while the situations themselves may not be something that you've experienced, they are something that you can imagine. And the emotions behind it are something that anyone can relate to. So that's how I try to build those stories. And at the end of the day, I need to give those characters hope, because without hope, we are lost. And so when people finish reading my stories, I want them to come away with that sense of, it doesn't matter how tough things get, that if you hang on to hope and you surround yourself with the right people, you will be okay in the end. I don't know if that actually answered your question.
You nailed it. We have covered so much ground, Sandie, in our conversation, and it's been fabulous. I'm really looking forward to catching up with you at NBRF, if not before. And I know readers can find you, hopefully, if they haven't caught up with you already on tour, there are still some dates. So can they find those dates on your website?
Yes, they are on the website. There's a couple of the later ones I haven't put up yet. The October ones I have not put up yet. But for the rest of the July and August ones, I think they are all up there. So yeah, head to the website and find them there.
Okay, fantastic. I'll put your website and your socials in the show notes for the episode so people will be able to find you. And they can also go to, is it nbrf.com?
.au.
.com.au. Okay, to find out about the Northern Beaches Readers Festival. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sandie. It's been lovely to chat.
Thanks, Pamela. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.